talking about the leadership mindset and communication culture of a particular team, Alan Mulally, former CEO of Ford Motor Company, said, like a lot of companies, you only brought an issue to your supervisor if you had a solution. So now you're just managing a secret. You don't know what's going on. Now, this approach is not unique to that particular organization. I remember being given the exact same advice as an employee, being told that you don't go to your supervisor unless you have a solution to the problem you're bringing. And actually, later, in a position of leadership, I was reprimanded by a colleague for having brought up an issue during a leadership meeting. I was pulled aside and I was told, we don't tell him these things. It makes us look bad. What? That blew my mind. It made absolutely no sense to me. Isn't that why we have these meetings, to talk about these things? So now, of course, years later, with much more experience, now as an executive, I can say with absolute certainty that I disagree even more with that advice. That's terrible advice. So what can a leader do to help foster a culture that surfaces issues rather than buries them? Well, the very first thing to do is to welcome team members sharing issues that they're aware of. I mean, I would much rather have someone come to me with a problem as soon as it's discovered, even if they have no solution. Of course, it's great if they do have a solution, but I wouldn't want that to prevent them from coming to me early. I wouldn't want them to sit on that information for, let's say, weeks as they try to figure out a solution. No, come to me as soon as possible, especially if it's an ongoing problem and potentially causing more damage the longer it happens. So when trying to make them feel welcomed, start by thanking them. Say thank you. Actually say thank you for bringing this to your attention. Make them feel like they did the right thing. So no eye rolls, no groaning. Make them feel like they did the right thing. I mean, it may even have been really hard for them to come to you, especially if they came from a culture of sweeping things under the rug or keeping things secret. They may be really concerned about what could happen. So make sure you applaud their courage, applaud the fact that they were honest with you, and potentially even shown weakness. Because maybe they're the ones who caused the issue. Maybe it was one of their own mistakes that started this. Now, I'm not saying that there won't ever be any consequences just because they told you the truth and they were honest. I mean, obviously, it depends on what it is. But recognize at the same time that they came to you hoping to make it right and fix things. And again, depending on the severity and what it is, there may be some consequences to it, but at least recognize they're trying. And I would say, in my experience anyway, it's rare that it's that extreme. I consider that an outlier most of the time. The vast majority of the time, it's something that is either fixable or it's smaller consequences. It's rarely something so big that it requires something dramatic. So for the most part, it's just me thanking them, and really appreciating that they took that risk and trusted enough to come and tell me what was happening in a timely manner. So to also encourage this open communication culture, really make the time to listen, even if it's not convenient. I know all about that, okay? Like, I know that managing and growing a business can leave us really, really tired and with very little time. I recognize that our schedules are usually packed and that we frequently are managing one unexpected crisis to the next. And that's just the reality of growing a business. Yes, there are some things that we can do to guard against that. I talk about that all the time. But I do recognize that time pressure. And I also recognize that sometimes it really feels like if somebody brings me one more problem, it's just going to break the proverbial camel's back. That's it. I'm done. I quit. No, but it does feel that way sometimes. It's like, I can't take one more problem. And full disclosure, there were times in private where I have been like, what? But here's the thing. Every time, clearly, have that reaction in private. It has no place in front of the person who was vulnerable enough to come and bring something to you. So have your reaction in private. But I can tell you that every single time that I was in a situation where I was so stressed, I had so much on my plate. I was like, oh my geez, I can't, not one more problem. But every single time that I showed up, ready to listen, I was like, this is my role. This is what I do. Every time I showed up, I listened. Every single time I walked away grateful that I had shown up the way I did, that I listened the way I did, and that the team member had come to me with this, even though the time was not convenient. And yes, there are times when it might be a toxic team member who's trying to cause problems, but I consider that to be a whole other issue. So typically, it's amazing team members that are surfacing real issues that need to be addressed. If there is a toxic team member, I don't consider that the same, because that's an issue that needs to be addressed separately, and it requires a whole other set of evaluation. But I'm just talking about the amazing team members, the typically vast majority of amazing team members that come to you with a problem. So every time that happened, grateful every single time, even though I was feeling the time pressure crunch. So really make sure you listen. Another way to help foster that open communication culture is patiently guide them to a solution. So, I was saying that we want to make sure that team members feel empowered to come and give you that information. Well, I also recognize that we don't want to swing that pendulum all the way to the other side, where you essentially have this revolving door and one team member after the other comes in and brings you all the problems and zero solutions. No, of course not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about finding that middle ground. And we want to encourage them. I want to make sure that it's about removing the fear of not having a solution. Because ideally, yeah, that'd be great if they had solutions. And you know what? Realistically, most of the time, they are the ones the best place to come up with that solution, because they're the ones who are in it all the time. And so most of the time, they have just the absolute best possible solutions. So you want to encourage them to feel like they can come, even though they don't have the solutions, but also recognize that they're likely to have the best solution. So you want to kind of help them arrive there. And so again, in that spirit of not having the pendulum swing too far, where it's just like, oh, great, I just passed the problem over and we're done. Just try to dig into why that's happening, if it is happening. Is it because coming up with a solution isn't something that they've been taught? Is it a lack of training? Because that happens. Maybe they haven't been told or taken through the workflow of how do you work out these solutions. I'm going to say, though, don't just assume that that's the case. I've been on the receiving end of some condescending behavior at times, and just be aware of that it's not necessarily that they haven't had the training. Maybe it's just that it's really complex. So don't assume. But if you walk through your thought process to finding the solution together, that might teach them your approach to problem solving. And at the same time, when you do that exercise, it will really help you determine whether it was that the team member wasn't familiar with the problem solving approach, in which case provide them with some training, or whether it was really just that they need a fresh perspective. Again, if somebody's in a certain environment all the time, sometimes it gets difficult. It's really hard to kind of get a little bit of distance because you're just constantly in it. And so you almost need that newbie outside person to just be like, hey, I wonder, why is that this thing? And then it's like, oh, I hadn't looked at it that way, because they're so trained, so good, such experts, that sometimes you really need that fresh perspective. And so it's the idea, just make sure that you work that with them, finding that solution to uncover whether it's that they require a little bit of training, or whether they just needed that perspective. And so in doing this exercise, then you can be confident that you're modeling the problem solving approach and it surfaces what the real issue is. And again, it's really about ensuring that, although encouraged to come with ideas with potential solutions, if the team member has no idea how to solve something, that they still feel empowered to come to you or go to the immediate supervisor with that answerless problem. So creating this open communication culture, finding that middle ground between people are sweeping things under the rug and everybody's coming to you with zero solutions. It starts with you. It starts with you, the leader. So when you feel that frustration of a team member surfacing yet another issue that needs addressing, take a deep breath. Work with them to find a solution. But mostly, take comfort in knowing that you created a culture where people feel safe enough to tell you the truth. To paraphrase Alan Mulally, at least now, you're no longer going to be managing with all these secrets kept from you. At least you're going to know what is going on. And that gives you and your business a fighting chance.